Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is October 7th. Well, I was wrapping up my garden up at the cabin, and I did something a little unusual this year, and that is I did not cut my lily bed back after my lilies were done blooming. Now, up at the cabin, I have a nice-sized lily bed. I would say it's about 3 feet by 4 feet, and it's filled with lilies, probably about 50 or 60 different lilies, all different kinds, all different sizes, and I love that. It's a riot of color. It's got all kinds of staggered starts and stops to the different blooms. And I positioned it right on the edge of my old growth forest, which was a direct result of some of my research on where lilies grow in the wild. And once I read that they like to grow along the margins of the forest, well, then I gathered up all my lilies and I put them together in that spot up at the cabin. And I've been very pleased with that decision and how well that they grow there. Now, given that these lilies are growing in between two very large white pines, it can be a little challenging to crawl in there and take care of them. And so between that and then everything else that I had going on this summer, the lilies did not get cut back. Well, much to my delight, because as I was standing at my potting table, potting up my houseplants and tidying them up to go back in the house, upsizing and resizing all different types of containers and plants, I looked over and I see my lily bed, and it has turned the most magnificent shade of yellow, and it was set against the backdrop of some magenta and purple colored annuals that I had planted in the spring, and they were absolutely lush and glorious. But they totally set off my lilies. And it was just one of those moments that you have in the garden when you get a chance to see something and to appreciate something with fresh eyes. And I was so glad that I had not cut back my lilies. And now that I'm talking to you about this, I remember one of the reasons why I decided to leave them alone is I was planning on moving some of them around. I was going to put the tall ones more toward the back and then dig out the short ones and make sure they were more toward the front. But of course, that did not get done this year. And so that's a 2023 project. So yeah, that's probably another reason why they did not get cut back. But still a big payoff, very rewarding to see that beautiful yellow color in the perfect spot in the garden. And so now moving forward, I think I'll just let them be so I can enjoy them every single fall. All right, let's get to today's garden history. It was on this day, October 7th, in 1747, that Antoine Nicolas Duchesne was born. He was a French botanist, gardener, and professor at Versailles. A specialist in strawberries and gourds, Antoine Nicolas Duchesne was a student of Bernard de Jussieu at the Royal Garden in Paris. Duchesne was a plant pioneer, and he recognized that mutation was a natural occurrence and that plants could be altered through mutation at any time. And when he was a young botanist, Duchesne began experimenting with strawberries, and strawberries became one of his specialties. Ever since the 1300s, 400 years before Duchesne arrived on the scene, wild strawberries were incorporated into gardens. But it was on July 6th in 1764 that Duchesne created what we know as the modern strawberry, the strawberry that we know and love today. Strawberries are members of the rose family, and their seeds are on the outside of the fruit. Just how many seeds are on a single strawberry? Well, the average strawberry has around 200 seeds. Now, if you're wondering whether to cut your strawberry plants back for winter, you should cut your plants back about 3 inches after your final harvest. And as you tidy up your strawberry plants at the end of the season, you can remove all the dead leaves and trimmings. But right about now, strawberry growers are winterizing their plants, which is really pretty straightforward. All you need to do is cover your plants with about 6 to 8 inches of mulch, and then when spring returns, just remove the winterizing mulch as your strawberry plants wake up and start to grow. Pretty straightforward. And it was also on this day, October 7th in 1817, that James Madison, America's 4th president, was elected to serve as the president of his local agricultural society. James had just retired from his presidential duties in 1817, and he quickly resumed his passion for cultivating the land. James spent many hours every day working on his 4-acre Montpelier garden. And the horseshoe-shaped garden bed that was at the Madison home was assumed to be an homage to the floor of the House of Representatives. Well, the following May, in May of 1818, James spoke to his fellow farmers and gardeners in the Agricultural Society about some of the latest discoveries in agriculture. James was always trying to stay abreast of the latest information. And so on that day, over 200 years ago, James talked about the benefits of incorporating manure into the soil to leverage nitrogen, and also optimizing water for plant uptake. James Madison was one of America's earliest conservationists, and he was especially concerned with preserving the land and wise stewardship of natural resources. And it was also on this day, October 7th in 1817, that Joseph Stayman, the Kansas horticulturist, was born. Joseph's obituary said he came to Kansas in 1859 and brought 500,000 fruit grafts with him, from which he started the fruit industry in the state. And it's true that Joseph was a fruit pioneer in Kansas. He dropped his medical practice to pursue horticulture, and he spent the majority of his time breeding new varieties of apples, strawberries, and grapes at his orchards, which hosted over 3,000 trees. Joseph worked specifically to cultivate the varieties that were best suited to the Kansas soil and climate. Joseph also helped to establish the Kansas State Horticultural Society in 1866. Well, researching Joseph was a complete delight. He was a total Renaissance man. He developed skills across a spectrum of interests and science. He bred the famous Clyde strawberry, and he established himself as an outstanding botanical artist. Many of his drawings of various plants and flowers are held at the Smithsonian. And here's a fun little fact about Joseph Stayman. He was one of the country's best checkers players, and some of his games lasted months to a year, since he played many of his matches by correspondence. Fun little fact about Joseph Stayman, Kansas plantsman. And today we celebrate the birthday of James Whitcomb Riley, the American writer and poet. He was born on this day, October 7th in 1849. James used a peach tree as a metaphor for love in his poem, The Ripest Peach. He wrote, "The ripest peach is highest on the tree, and so her love, beyond the reach of me, is dearest in my sight. Sweet breezes bow her heart down to me, where I worship now. She looms aloft where every eye may see. the ripest peach is highest on the tree. Well, did you know that in the United States, over 30 of our 50 states grow peaches? The peach season varies, of course, by state, but it usually ends right now in early October. Peaches are a member of the rose family, and they're rich in vitamins A and C. And there are two main types of peaches. Freestone peaches are the type of peaches that we buy whole and eat raw. But the clingstone peach is the peach that is canned commercially. Clingstone peaches get their name because cling peaches have stones that cling to the peach flesh. So when they extract that stone, the fruit is damaged. It still tastes great, but it doesn't look great. And so processing and canning is a way to redeem the damaged fruit. And although Georgia is known for its peaches, California produces more peaches every year than any other state in the union. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Growing Joy by Maria Fiala. This book came out in 2022, and the subtitle is The Plant Lover's Guide to Cultivating Happiness and Plants. And Maria says her book is full of planty practices to grow your way to a happier and more peaceful life. Well, this is another garden book that was conceived during the early days of the pandemic. And if you remember that time, so many of us were feeling disconnected and stressed and anxious, and we were looking for ways to feel more anchored, to feel healthy, to feel stronger, and definitely overall, I would say, more positive. And this was definitely the case with Maria. In fact, she introduces her book this way. We've only just met, but I'm going to confess something to you. I wrote this book about joy in what seemed to be the least joyful period in my life. Funny how that happens. When I first envisioned this book, I had my list of ideas and practices all lined up and tied in a pretty bow for you. But then there was a little plot twist, and when the time came around for me to actually write this book, my life kind of imploded in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. I lost my job, my wedding was postponed due to social distancing, and through a series of unexpected events, my partner and I had to move 3 times in a year, with a 6-month stint living with my parents, the ultimate romantic dream for any engaged couple. So you can tell that Maria is doing a fantastic job of setting the stage, and a lot of this sounds so relatable for so many of us. But then Maria had an epiphany, and she writes, I looked around at my plant collection, and I noticed that my plants also looked miserable, limp leaves, thirsty, yearning for light. And seeing them so unhappy made me pause and realize how much I related to them. And in the midst of moving, pivoting, and mourning, I had let the beautiful practices and routines that I had developed lapse. And then she writes, this realization hit me like a 2-ton bag of potting mix. I love that. Maria has plenty of little snippets of humor in her book that are sure to bring a chuckle. Maria continues, a deeper realization set in. I stopped checking in with my friends, and my screen time was at an all-time high. My plants and I both needed some serious nurturing. Maria concludes, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do know that if you're open to it, this stuff works. No matter what season of life you're in, whether you're simply looking for some fun ways to enliven your days, suggestions for how to take the next step forward in plant parenthood, or maybe you're looking for something deeper. But wherever you are, I see you and I'm here for you, and let's grow some joy together, one leaf at a time. Well, as you can tell, Maria's book is perfectly titled Growing Joy. And this book is 272 pages of connecting with plants and ourselves, and in the process, gaining new insights, a more positive outlook, and a healthier lifestyle. This book is a delightful mix of self-care through plant care, helping you to feel more joyous, grounded, and optimistic. You can get a copy of Growing Joy by Maria Fiala and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $8. Great book. I think it's the perfect book, actually, as we all come back into our homes, snuggle in, cozy in, and get ready for winter. Growing Joy. Great title. All right. And speaking of growing joy, we end the show today with a botanic spark that features Thomas Rainer and Claudia West. It was on this day, October 7th in 2015, already 7 years ago, that Thomas Rainer and Claudia West's book, Post-Wild World, Designing Plant Communities for Resilient Landscapes, debuted. And I remember this book coming out. I absolutely loved the title of it, and I loved the cover. And it was through this book that Thomas introduced the notion of gardens as communities, which makes gardeners much more sensitive to concepts like density and diversity in our plantings. And I love what Thomas and Claudia wrote at the beginning of their book, because I think it set the tone for what they were trying to accomplish. And they do this by comparing and contrasting how plants grow in the wild versus how they grow in our gardens. Here's what they wrote. The way plants grow in the wild and the way they grow in our gardens is starkly different. In nature, plants have an order, an individual harmony resulting from their adaptation to a site. Our gardens are often arbitrary assortments from various habitats, related only by our personal preferences. In fact, the very activities that define gardening, weeding, watering, fertilizing, and mulching all imply a dependency of plants on the gardener for survival. Gardeners are often frustrated when some plants spread beyond their predetermined location, and they're surprised when others struggle to get established. And further complicating this is the general availability of plants from every corner of the globe. And so Thomas asked this thought-provoking question: how do we shift the paradigm, making desirable plantings that look and function sympathetically with how they evolve in nature? And the answer is by observing and embracing the wisdom that we can find in natural plant communities. As you can tell, Thomas has spent a great deal of time in nature just looking at and studying various plant communities. He is a master of garden design and designing with native plants. And so in this book, Thomas wrote his vision of what he calls the post-wild world. And what he wrote here may actually surprise you. Thomas wrote, "The front lines of the battle for nature are not in the Amazon rainforest or the Alaskan wilderness. The front lines are our backyards, medians, parking lots, and elementary schools." And then he shared his vision for the future. He wrote, "The uncertainty of the future will provide an incredible gift. It will liberate planting from all those forces that try to tame it." Thomas Rainer and Claudia West's Post-Wild World. If you don't have a copy, You can definitely pick one up on Amazon. I see used copies are going for under $20, which is fantastic. I think this book will join the many others that have come before it as a garden classic. So if you're concentrating on trying to build your repertoire as a gardener, putting together the best of past and current garden writing, then I hope you consider getting yourself a copy of this book, Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rainer and Claudia West. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. I hope you have a lovely weekend and get to spend some time in your garden. Think about what areas you're going to clean up and what areas you're going to leave wild and what you have time and energy enough to do. And in the meantime, don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.